Hello there, welcome to the Football Bloc. My name is Brandon, and today I'm going to give you my predictions for the quarterfinals of the Champions League. So if that sounds interesting, let's hop right into it.
Eu quis amar, mas tive medo e quis salvar.
So the quarterfinals of the 2024-2025 Champions Leagues are finally here. Only 8 teams are left. We have 4 matchups here. Let's look ahead to every single one of these games. I'm going to look at how these teams match up against each other, how these teams have been doing so far in their domestic seasons, in the Champions League in particular, and of course, a score prediction for each matchup here. So without further ado, let's hop right into it. And the first matchup that we're going to look at is between Bayern Munich and Inter Milan. In my opinion, this one is actually the most exciting one, in my opinion. I think this is the most evenly matched, and it's the only one that doesn't really have a clear favorite. If I had to choose, I would say Inter Milan is slight favored, but still, it's very, very close, especially in comparison to the other ones, which I think there are like a clear favorite in each of the other matchups. Looking in particular at Bayern Munich, and they've had a bit of an interesting season so far. I mean, they are top of the Bundesliga, like always. It's not a foregone conclusion. I wouldn't say there is still a title race, but you know, it's pretty likely, it looks very likely actually, that Bayern Munich will end up winning the Bundesliga yet again. And yes, they still remain one of the best teams in Europe, but they don't have that cutting edge like it seems they used to in the past. You know, go back 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And you can see that in particular with how they play, just their squad. They can be very poor defensively, in my opinion, and that heavily got exposed throughout the entirety of this Champions League season. They had some really poor moments, some moments where they didn't look like the Bayern Munich that we know. They actually had to go through the playoffs, and they were very, very close along with Celtic in that game. And I think Celtic, at times was much better than Bayern Munich there. That being said, Bayern Munich did redeem themselves in the round of 16 where they utterly destroyed Bayer Leverkusen. Yes, Bayer Leverkusen did kind of implode themselves, but still, Bayern Munich, by far the better team, a very admirable performance there. That being said, there are some glaring issues with the team currently. Like I said, I do think that they are very poor defensively, but then to make that even more complicated, Bayern Munich is going through a massive injury crisis right now, in particular in the defense. Alphonso Davies is out, Ito is out, Upamecano is out, which, might actually be a good thing considering, his track record in, top-class Champions League matches in the past. Manuel Neuer is out, though. Jamal Musiala is out. Kingsley Coman is out as well. There is an insane amount of players that are injured and will not be playing in this game here. Now let's look to the other side. We have Inter Milan, and I think that Inter Milan is also one of the best teams in the world. They don't get a whole lot of the media attention. Obviously, most of the media attention is going to be on the Premier League as well as the big teams like Barcelona, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich. But Inter Milan is definitely up there. I think they're very deserving of a spot here in the quarterfinals. And last season, they were insane. They completely conquered Serie A. And this year, it's not, as consistent. I think they have taken a step back a little bit. They're not as ruthless going forward. They can concede a few more goals. They're not as strong defensively. But that is entirely within Serie A, I would say. And even saying that, they are still top of the table. Again, it's not a foregone conclusion either, but I do think it's very likely that they will end up winning Serie A, especially when you look at Napoli. They've kind of been stumbling a little bit. But the Champions League, Inter Milan is, I think, a step higher than how they are in their other competitions. And I think a reason for that is because as good as Inter Milan were last year, they did kind of drop the ball in the Champions League, getting eliminated by Atletico in the round of 16. This year, I think they have a chip on their shoulder. They want to prove that they can go far in the Champions League again, like they did in 2023, where they made it to the final. And this season is clear evidence of that. Up until this point, they've only conceded 3 goals the entirety of the season, which is crazy to say. They finished within the top 8. They had some very, very good results in the league phase, the group league phase, and then they easily defeated Feyenoord in the round of 16. It wasn't a classic performance over the 2 legs, but at no point did it look like Inter Milan had their backs up against the wall or were in danger of being eliminated. It's a very solid game plan from Simone Inzaghi, who is a cup manager, who is known for, just punching above his weight in the cup competitions. But then you also have to look at Inter Milan's defense in particular, the players that they have, but then also up top, Lautaro Martinez and Marcus Thuram, one of the best strike forces in the entire world as well. And while it is a bit of an aging midfield, it is still a very competent and very tactical and hardworking midfield. You can argue that they might not be as focused on the Champions League, given that they still are in the middle of a title race, a much more tight title race compared to the Bundesliga. But still, they are going to be a very tough opponent for Bayern Munich. Now, when you look at the 2 teams together, like I said, very close, but I think Inter Milan is a slight favorite, and I think that Inter Milan is going to be going through at the end of the day here. And overall, I think Inter Milan is just a better team. If you look how solid they are defensively, as I said before, but also just the form that some of their midfielders and attackers are. But there are 2 reasons in particular why I think this matchup will go in Inter Milan's favor. Obviously, the injuries, you can't look past that for Bayern Munich. That is going to be a huge obstacle that they're going to have to face. And the second reason is, look, if you just compare the 2 managers together, as I said before, Simone Inzaghi, I think, is one of the best managers in the world at the moment, particularly in cup competitions. He has a wealth of experience. He's already won a bunch of titles with Inter Milan. Compare that to Vincent Kompany, who I think is actually doing a little better than a lot of people, including myself, thought. That being said, he is an incredibly young manager. This is only his 3rd club that he's managed. It's only his, I think, maybe 4th year in management. So when you look at that, I think it is very clear that Inter Milan is going to go through. But I don't think it's going to be a complete blowout or anything like that. I still think it's going to be very close. And my score prediction is going to be 2-1 on aggregate for the Serie A side. Now let's look on to the next matchup, and we have Barcelona going up against Borussia Dortmund. And this is an interesting matchup. It's a matchup that we saw before in the group phase, and in that game, Barcelona came out 3-2 winners, and I think we are going to see a very similar results, at least in the outcome this time around, to give a spoiler for my prediction there. Now, I am a Barcelona fan, so I'm not going to try and get carried away. I'm going to try and not be biased. That being said, this Barcelona team, just in terms of how they've played, just the player quality, the form that the players in, the tactical awareness, this is the best Barcelona team that I have seen since the 15-16 season. Now, I'm just talking about how they play, the playing style. Of course, we have to judge it at the end of the season, considering how many trophies are, how far they go in season to make, a full and concise judgment. But just on the playing style, this is the best team that I've seen from Barcelona in nearly a decade. They went through a little bit of a hiccup towards the end of 2024, but that seems to have gone out the window. Barcelona is crushing it in every single competition, which to some extent you can make an argument is it could be a bit of a hindrance. I mean, we saw in the last game against Real Betis, Barcelona just looked fatigued. They ended up drawing the match 1-1. They did look a little fatigued, in particular some of their attacking players. Barcelona is top of La Liga right now. It's a 4-point gap over Real Madrid in 2nd place, and I think a 10-point gap over Atletico Madrid in 3rd place. So there's still a title race, especially when you consider just how good Real Madrid is overall, and then Atletico is never going to give up either. Barcelona also has the Copa del Rey final against Real Madrid coming up at the end of this month. So there is a lot on their plate to handle, but at the same time, you just have to look at how good they are playing and how deep this squad is. Barcelona many times doesn't have that deep of a squad. They rely on just their outstanding and world-class star players. This team's a little different this time. Yes, they have a lot of world-class players as stars, but they also have a very deep squad. Now, on the other side, you look at Borussia Dortmund, and this has been a very topsy-turvy, very inconsistent and chaotic season for them. They started off with Nuri Sahin as the manager, and like many people predicted, including myself, it it did not pan out. They were atrocious in the Bundesliga, losing tons of games, conceding lots of goals. They just lacked that strong team mentality that they had in important games last year. And Nuri Sahin was sacked. Niko Kovac has come in, and he has done well enough to steady the ship. They have heavily improved. There are still some glaring issues with the team. No disrespect to Borussia Dortmund, but their defense is Swiss cheese. They tend to score enough goals to offset that, but still, their defense is incredibly incompetent. They concede a whole lot of goals. They make a lot of mistakes that are very avoidable, whether it be individual errors, just tactical errors, things like that. The defense is not their strong suits. If you look at Borussia Dortmund, they do outperform in Europe. That has been proven both this season and last year. But at the same time, you can't rule out how poor they've been in the Bundesliga in totality. Even though they have kind of steadied the ship and gone in the right direction. In their last game, they beat Freiburg, the team directly above them. They beat them 4-1. A very good victory for them there, but they still are 8th place in the Bundesliga. There's a good chance that they won't qualify for the Champions League next year. You have to keep that in mind when you look at just this team overall, their weaknesses that can be exposed. While I think that Borussia Dortmund are by no means a pushover, you can't look past Barcelona in this matchup here. Even if you look at that game in the group phase, Borussia Dortmund at times were the better team. They outplayed Barcelona in certain patches of the game and ended up being 3-2 though. And that was the game Barcelona didn't have to win. Borussia Dortmund did have to win that to qualify in the top 8 versus Barcelona. They were just looking for a more favorable matchup at that point. It was not necessary for them to win that game, and they still came out on top. When you look at Barcelona at full strength in a knockout round game, yes, they might be a little fatigued, but over the course of 2 legs, I think there's only one winner here. I'm going to say Barcelona go through 5-2 on aggregate. Next matchup we have is another exciting one. We have Arsenal going up against Real Madrid. Start off, if you look at Arsenal, they are a team that people like to make fun of all the time for bottling it, for going far in competitions and playing well, but at the end of the day, not coming up with the trophy. And while that is something to mention, that is something to note, you shouldn't forget the fact that Arsenal is just objectively one of the best teams in the world, in particular in defense. I've said this before in previous videos, but they have one of the best, if not the best, defense in all of Europe, in my opinion. Just a very solid structure set forth from Mikel Arteta. And usually you would say the foil to that is their offense is not and particularly prolific, and they still don't have an out-and-out striker, an out-and-out number 9, but they have seemed to be able to compensate for that, where a bunch of other players on all sides of the field are able to come forth with goals. And the biggest piece of evidence was in the last round where they went up against PSV, a very good PSV side, that must be said, and they scored 9 goals against them over the course of the 2 legs. An absolutely crazy return. 2 very good performances, in particular the first leg, very good performance from Arsenal there. You also have to look at Bukayo Saka, their best player overall, in my opinion. He has just come back from injury, and he has already set comfortably right in scoring in his first game back. And another thing to mention for Arsenal is, you can count on them that they are going to give everything in this match, because it is the only competition that they are realistically competing for. Obviously, they didn't win the League Cup. They got eliminated pretty early on in the FA Cup. And while there still is mathematically a title race in the Premier League, I don't think that Arsenal is going to catch up against Liverpool. Liverpool would have to have an absolutely disaster of a collapse, and I don't see that happening. There's already a pretty sizable gap. And then you also have to look at Arsenal's recent games as well. They tied Everton, even though it was a controversial result there. Still, they didn't come away with the 3 points. So the Champions League is the only competition that they are still alive in. And saying that, they have been very, very good in the Champions League. They were very good in the group phase. They had some really good results against some top teams. And then, as I mentioned before, they completely massacred PSV, leading them here against Real Madrid. And Real Madrid, they are the defending champions of Spain, the defending champions of Europe. And despite the fact that they added Mbappe to their team this time around, they still seem to be lacking a lot of what they should have. They are playing below their standards, I would say. In particular, you have to look at their defense. Their defense has been atrocious this year. For a team that is this with such prestige, it is embarrassing the way that there is some of the defensive mistakes they have, just tactically, the way that they set up like the goals they concede. A team like Real Madrid should not be defending like that. In their defense, there is a bit of an injury crisis going on. A lot of players are out for what it looks like the rest of the season. Some guys are just recently coming back, things like that. Now, their attack also hasn't necessarily been playing as well either. Mbappe has settled in, and despite the fact that he was relatively poor by his high standards at the beginning of the season, he looks to be in great form now. He's scoring in almost every game he's playing, putting up some good performances. But Rodrigo's been a little inconsistent. Vinicius has been pretty poor over the past few games, and Jude Bellingham will pop up with a great performance here and there, but also just not on a consistent basis like last season either. And if you look at their recent games as well, their most recent game was a 2-1 loss to Valencia, a very embarrassing loss. The way that they conceded that winner there from Valencia in stoppage time, and then also the previous game before that was the second leg of the Copa del Rey semifinal against Real Sociedad. And at the end of the day, Real Madrid did end up going through. They still conceded 4 goals to Real Sociedad. A very poor defensive performance from them. They had to push it all the way to extra time to go through, and even then it was a very topsy-turvy game that could have gone either way. So Real Madrid not in the best form in my opinion. And if you take all that into consideration, if you take a look at the poor form that Real Madrid is in, the great form that Arsenal is in the totality of the season, particularly in the Champions League, all logic would point to Arsenal being the one going through. But I don't think that's going to happen. In fact, I can confidently say that Real Madrid is going to go through against Arsenal. And the reason why is if you look at Arsenal, they are vastly inexperienced in the Champions League. They're vastly inexperienced in most cup competitions with this crop of players. You know, if you look at this squad in particular, last year was the first time that many of them have even played in the Champions League. Compare that to Real Madrid. They are the team with the most experience in the Champions League by a country mile. Obviously, they are the defending champions this year. They've also won the tournament 15 times. And even outside of the Champions League, just in totality, despite the fact that they play bad, they still find a way to end up winning. And you look at how they have performed in this Champions League season so far. You know, they weren't good enough in the group phase. They had to go through to the playoff rounds. They ended up wiping the floor with Manchester City, and you could say, okay, well, you know, it's not a very good Manchester City this time around. They went up against Atletico Madrid, who were in red-hot form, and despite the fact that Atletico Madrid outplayed them over the course of the 2 legs, they still ended up going through. As I mentioned, the Copa del Rey semifinals, which we just saw, you know, they played awful, but still found a way to get to the final. Yes, they still have that final to play. They're also in the middle of the title race in La Liga, as I mentioned before. But Real Madrid is the type of team that, you know, they expect to go far in all their competitions. You know, they're a team that they don't get flustered, they don't get overwhelmed or anxious or anything like that. And the Champions League is their bread and butter. They are better in the Champions League than they are in any other competition, in my opinion. So, while I think it is going to be close, I don't think Arsenal is going to, you know, completely collapse or anything like that. I think you can't look past Real Madrid's record in the Champions League. I think they will go through. I'm going to say 3-2 on aggregate. Now let's look at the last matchup here, and we have yet another exciting one. We have PSG going up against Aston Villa. If you look particularly at PSG, this has been overall a pretty good season for PSG. In Ligue 1, it's been, you know, business as usual. They are consistently winning games. The gap between them and the rest of the chasing pack is apparent as always. In fact, with their most recent win over Angers, they have been officially crowned champions of the 2024-2025 season. So not that it ever was a distraction, so to say. They are definitely not worrying about the title race there. They can focus solely on the Champions League for the most part. Yes, they do have, you know, some other cup competitions, but the Champions League is going to be their sole focus right now. They are not distracted by any title race or anything like that. Now, in particular in the Champions League, I thought that they started kind of poor. They lost the game against Arsenal. They lost against Bayern Munich. In the group phase, they had to go through and qualify through the playoff round. And they almost didn't qualify for the playoff round as well. But once the new year started from January to now, they have been one of the best teams in the world. They all completely massacred Brest in the playoff round, 10-0. And then they also had a very impressive win over Liverpool in the round of 16. Yes, it had to go to penalties. It was a very close game, but I think over the course of the two legs, when you total up the amount of minutes and things like that, I think PSG were the better team, and I think they ultimately deserved to go through. That is a huge achievement considering how good Liverpool have been overall this season, particularly up until that point right there. You can really see the project that Lucho Enrique is building. PSG have gone through some tumultuous times in the Champions League when you just look at the lack of the team mentality that they've had in the past, but it looks like the project that Lucho Enrique has been building for almost a year and a half at this point is finally coming to fruition, or at least you can see the vision that he has there, which is ironic because Mbappe's gone, Messi and Neymar are gone, all these big stars are gone, and yet the team mentality is stronger. The team overall, in my opinion, is much stronger. We saw glimpses of it last year, even with Mbappe there, but I think this team is better now than they have ever been, really, at least in recent memory. And just on form, I think it is between PSG and Barcelona to be the best team in the world. Right now, like I said, strictly just on form. Now, looking over to the other side, we have Aston Villa, and they are the underdog team. They are, the one underdog team still left in this competition, and they have very much deserved their spot here. They have very much punched above their weight. They did very impressively enough to get to this competition, obviously finishing fourth in the Premier League last year. And then they did very well in the playoff round, in the group phase, where they didn't even need playoffs to get to the round of 16. They finished in the top 8. And then in the round of 16, they went up against Club Brugge. And yes, Club Brugge are not the biggest team in Europe. They still were in amazing form. And Aston Villa smashed them 6-1. If you look at Aston Villa in the Premier League as well, obviously, finishing in fourth last year, qualifying directly to the Champions League was a huge achievement. No one was expecting them to match that this time around, and they did go through a bit of a rough patch of form towards the end of 2024. But once the new year started, once they brought in Marco Asensio and Marcus Rashford, I think that they have completely transformed into a much better team. They are 6th currently, which is, very impressive considering all, how far they're going in all the competitions. Their most recent game, they defeated Nottingham Forest, who is in 3rd. So they are in great form. Like I said, highly punching above their weights. And the reason for that, the most important reason for that, is their manager, Unai Emery, who I think is one of the most underrated managers of all time, maybe the most underrated manager of this generation. He has done so much across all the teams that he has played for, or managed, but in particular with Aston Villa, he took them from being a team that's, kind of like a decent mid-table team to a team that is now in the quarterfinals of the Champions League. And it also must be said, he outperforms in European competitions. His biggest achievements are in European competitions. Obviously, winning 3 Europa Leagues in a row with Sevilla, or winning the Europa League with Villarreal, or bringing Villarreal all the way to the semifinals of the Champions League, and now what he's done with Aston Villa. But in particular, going up against PSG, he does have a chip on his shoulder. His time at PSG was not the best. The PSG fans weren't the biggest fans of him, and he definitely wants to, kind of prove to them his prowess as a manager, which will be really interesting to see. That being said, as good as Aston Villa can be, and as dangerous as it is to go up against the Unai Emery team in the Champions League, I think PSG are just too good to look past. As I said before, I think they are the best team in the world currently, alongside Barcelona. If you look at just this team overall, the form that every single player is in, this is the best we've ever seen for Donnarumma in a PSG shirt. Nuno Mensch, one of the best left backs in the world. The midfield, which I've talked about so many times, João Neves, Vitinha, Fabian Ruiz, one of the best midfields in the world. And then you look at the amazing form that Dembele's in, or Bradley Barcola, things like that, the guys that they can bring off the bench. I don't think that Aston Villa have enough in them to overcome PSG. I don't think it's going to be a blowout. I think it's going to be still pretty close, even if PSG is overall the best team. So I'm going to say 4-2 on aggregate, maybe a pair of 2-1 wins or something like that. At the end of the day, PSG will go through, but it won't be easy for them. And it'll also be a pretty admirable campaign for Aston Villa in the Champions League overall. So that has been my predictions for the Champions League quarterfinals. I'm saying when all said is done, or when all is said and done, Inter Milan, Barcelona, Real Madrid, and PSG are the 4 teams that are going to go through the semifinals. Let me know if you agree or you disagree. What are your predictions? Who do you think is going to go through? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Share this video with a friend. Follow the Football Bloc on social media. But anyway, guys, my name is Brandon. This has been the Football Bloc, and I hope you have a nice rest of your night.
Eu quis amar.